There you go. That's why we have friends, keep us on our toes. So we have this feeling that takes over when experiencing something anti-Semitic. And last week, we went through how the feeling of fear is ultimately the one that we deal with the most because, there's a lot of negative things happening in the world. But in our minds, when something happens that's anti-Semitic, what do we say to ourselves? We don't just say this is something bad and it should not happen. And the people that were the perpetrators are bad people, or they were doing a bad thing and they should not be doing that. In our minds, we say to ourselves, what's next? It really sits uncomfortably for us because if somebody does something anti-Semitic and I'd say, so what? So what? Bad things happen in the world. You go onto the news. Unfortunately, every day you can go onto any news website and you'll have a full, fresh feed of negative occurrences that took place that day. I don't know if everyone here has habitually visits the news websites, but that's the case. Any day, any time, there's always something negative happening. So why does anti-Semitism strike us? Because what we end up saying is, so what's next? If this could happen, then what might happen after this? Or how will this develop? And that is a fear. And then we're stuck with that fear and we don't know how to really progress practically and positively forward. And so that was the idea last week, how to quash that initial fear, how to know that we have who to depend on, we have who to trust in, and how much goodness that trust in Hashem could bring us. And ultimately the balance. Remember, we brought the different ways that you could balance out the partnership. Hashem asks us and gives us the privilege to be his partners in following through with action of some sort, taking initiative to do something about it. And that's what we want to do. We want to outsmart anti-Semitism by not letting it draw us down. And by not letting it draw us down, we will allow ourselves to do something and to overcome it. God willing. And so that was last week. This week, we're going to go on a little bit of a different track. It's very, very insightful what we're about to study. And it's quite a powerful idea. But before we dive into the idea, we're going to give a little bit of background. So the question that we want to answer in this lesson is, why does anti-Semitism persist? What keeps anti-Semitism going? And what answers are appropriate and what answers to that question are not so appropriate? How best to answer that question? Why does anti-Semitism persist? Why does it stick around for so long? Why does it not just go away? So before we go there, it's a good old story of two fellows opened up a storefront in a busy street in Manhattan. And they're sitting around in their storefront. Really, they haven't set everything up yet. They haven't even gotten their wares, their goods into the store yet to be selling. And one says to the other, it's not going to take 5 minutes before some Yiddele, some old Jew walks in and asks us, so what are we selling? So these two anti-Semitic individuals, they're not too busy. And sure enough, 2 minutes later, an old curious Jew walks inside and says, "Nu, so what you selling?" And so one guy pokes the other in the rib and he says, "Told you so." And he says, "We're selling idiots." So the Jew, without missing a beat, says, "Ha, you must be doing well. Only 2 left." So this is an issue that has been around for a very, very long time. I'll invite Josh and Zvi. You're both encouraged, invited, and more to share your presence with us with your videos as well, if you'd be comfortable with that. And so what we're, excellent, thank you. What we're looking to understand is, why does it persist? And to get a better understand and get a better context, anti-Semitism is ancient, it's absurd, and it's also contradictory, self-contradictory. So when you want to know, why does something keep on going? Well, you could say either it belongs, and therefore it continues, or it makes sense that this is how we should do things, so let's continue doing it this way. But when something is absurd and self-contradictory, you've got to ask yourself, so what keeps it going? Why do people keep doing these absurd things? Especially if they're self-contradictory. How do they not see the absurdity of it all? So if I could ask you, when did anti-Semitism begin? How old is it? What would you say? Jump in.
I would think since the earliest days of Christianity.
Excellent.
They were
Thank you.
They were trying to separate themselves from Judaism as much as they could, so they kind of had to other Jews to differentiate.
Excellent. Thank you, Tracy. And that we proposed to have killed their leader, their God. So that was obviously a good reason to hate us, is because we were the ones that caused the trouble. Okay, Zvi was saying how it's the most ancient hatred around. Zvi, where does it go back to?
I think really, if we trace it back, it really goes back to our time in Egypt, when we were considered a enemy nation, a plague upon the country, and even disregarding that, purely in a archaeological sense. Not to say that the Exodus didn't happen or anything, because even back then, news and such would be erased, because you don't want any proof that your gods don't exist. Little nation, beat you. Don't want any proof of that. So that's not what I'm saying at all. I mean, disregarding that on an archaeological sense, we can see even during the Kingdom of Israel, during the Bronze Age and Iron Age, there was fighting. There was anti-Semitism. It's the thing. The thing is that really the Jew hatred that we know now, it evolves from the Bronze and Iron Age, and from our time in Egypt up to now. And it's even
well, let's answer the question first, how ancient it is, before we discuss how it's evolved.
Sorry.
Separate point, but thank you.
Sorry.
That's excellent. And I'll thank you for both your points. So Tracy was saying the concept of anti-Semitism, like we understand it, is very commonly assumed to be connected to Christianity.
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely.
And Zvi is saying we find it even earlier, maybe in the Bible. We find it, the Exodus in Egypt itself. Some will connect it to the fight between Yaakov and Esav. Maybe already back then, you had this war between worlds, between nations, between leaders. And ultimately, we know that it continued with Amalek and with many, many different forms that it took, but it definitely is ancient.
Yes.
Besides
Yes.
for being ancient, it's also absurd. And I'm going to share with you a fascinating text. If you look in your student books, page 48, you'll find a text which is pretty cool. Doing JLI, and they dug up the good stuff. This is what's referred to as the oldest text of anti-Semitism that's been handed down to us in its form. This goes back to the 1st century after the Common Era, where you had a fellow Tacitus. He was a historian, and he was pre the time of Christianity, that when Christianity had already become a real religion and developed. He was before that time, and he was writing a historical piece, but you could see just from the outset that it's nonsense. It's not a true piece of history, and you could notice all of the anti-Semitic tropes coming through the text all the way through. So what we're going to do is read this text. Read text number 1 on student page 48. And I want you to notice, as we go through the text, what are the different anti-Semitic tropes? What are the anti-Semitic ideas that you could find as we run through that text? And if you'll be kind enough to read for us, Josh, I invite you to read text number 1.
Tacitus slanders Jews. Once during a plague in Egypt, which caused bodily disfigurement, King Bacchus approached the oracle of Ammon and asked for a remedy, whereupon he was told to purge his kingdom and to transport this race into other lands, since it was hateful to the gods. So the Hebrews were searched out and gathered together. Then, being abandoned in the desert, while all others lay idle and weeping, one only of the exiles, Moses by name, warned them not to hope for help from gods or men, for they were deserted by both, but to trust to themselves. The Jews regard as profane all that we hold sacred. On the other hand, they permit all that we abhor. They first chose to rest on the seventh day, but after a time, they were led by the charms of indolence to give over the 7th year as well to inactivity. The other customs of the Jews are base and abominable, and owe their persistence to their depravity. For the worst rascals among other peoples, renouncing their ancestral religions, always kept sending tribute and contributions to Jerusalem, thereby increasing the wealth of the Jews. Again, the Jews are extremely loyal toward one another and always ready to show compassion, but toward every other people they feel only hate and enmity.
So seeing that text, if you have in your student books, you have just a small exercise. Take that text and just notice how many different themes do you find that run through it that we're familiar with nowadays as being anti-Semitic themes. You're welcome to unmute and share.
There's so many. The loyalty to people before country, making us unpatriotic.
Excellent.
The hoarding of wealth, which also is complete slander, especially because in the Middle Ages.
Wait, before we go there.
Yep.
Hoarding of wealth. That's 2.
The hoarding of wealth. They have their own faith, which profanes everything we hold dear, and they permit the most depraved things, of which is also complete slander.
And thank you. Let me add on to that. When they say that we're not only disloyal to the country or the people, we're disloyal to their gods. What does that add up to? For them, the ultimate moral compass is their God. And if we're hated by their God, that justifies anything treatment of the Jewish people, because their gods hate us. So that means they could do anything to us without any sort of repercussion morally.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Ruth.
the seventh day, they rest and they become, lazy in a sense. And then they have the seventh year.
Yeah, yeah. And it's self-contradictory because 2 minutes later, they say how ambitious we are in getting everyone's money. We try and get everything that we can.
And we do it in 6 days.
Very good. So we're obviously the other. But now, how does this whole text begin? I think that's something that could get missed out. Once during a plague in Egypt.
Yep.
What does that tell us?
Just going to say that Jews are responsible for the Black Plague. Jews are responsible for COVID, everything.
Yes. So they take what is an issue and they blame it conveniently on those Jews. It's a plague, obviously, that was occurring at the time, but also you see how it's really nonsense. He takes Moses and he brings it up in the story, which is obviously not appropriate for the truth of the story. What's funny about it is that as absurd as it is, people don't even notice the absurdity. There's a great story of Rabbi Dr. Abraham Tversky. I'm sure that you're familiar with him. He's a psychologist. He wrote over 80 published titles of self-help books, and he ran a substance abuse center, and he was a professor at the university. He was like a very well-educated individual.
Psychologist.
Absolutely. So he was from a Hasidic family. He was actually on par with his brothers in terms of Torah knowledge and devotion. He could have led his Hasidic group. And he chose the path that he took to be educated in that area, and that was his passion. And he was brilliant, but he always dressed as a Hasidic Jew, which meant he had the fur hat and he had a long black coat. And so one time he's riding on the bus and a fellow looks at him and he probably figured, here's this guy, probably doesn't speak a word of English. All he speaks is Yiddish and he looks so strange, and it got him upset. Another Jew on the bus. And this fellow went over to Rabbi Tversky and he says, why are you so outdated? Why can't you get with the program? Why do you have to look different and dress different? And why do you have to be like that? So Rabbi Tversky turns to him. This guy probably thought Rabbi Tversky doesn't even speak English or something. Anyway, he turns to him and he makes as if in his posh English accent or something, excuse me, I don't know what you mean. I'm Amish, actually. And the guy he did like a double, triple take. And then he started apologizing. Excuse me, I'm sorry that I said that to you. And absolutely, I support the way that you dress and your traditions. You should keep them and be proud of them. And that self-contradictory message is just ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. Like we see, all of these claims in this text, they're all absurd. Now, the reason I bring this up is because there's a very different perspective that you could take when you know that something is already ancient and that it's already established as absurd. I'll give you an example. You imagine a guy who's renting an apartment and the landlord treats him just terribly. He has this terrible experience. He's a good man. He does no harm. He pays his rent and the landlord harasses him. Anything he asks for, he gets over the head. He can't understand it. Why am I treated this way? He feels like, what am I doing wrong? And then he begins to speak to the neighbors. And what do you think the neighbors tell him? This landlord, he's just a no-goodnik. He's just a nudnik. He just does this to everyone. He's always done this. He's been around forever. He's always been treating people badly. So what changes? initially he felt like, what am I doing wrong to deserve this treatment? This is an exceptional treatment. This is crazy. Why am I being treated this way? And you immediately think, well, maybe it's something that's happening that's causing this treatment. But when he hears from his neighbors, it's always been like that, and this is how he treats everyone, then on the one hand, it makes you more upset because chutzpah, he does this to everybody. On the other hand, it changes my perspective of it. I don't think of it as so shocking, and I don't think of it as something that I could change on my end, how I act towards the landlord, what I request of him, and all of a sudden he's going to change how he acts towards me. No, I don't think that I'm going to get too far with that approach. So it changes the perspective. And I'll add one more example before I'll give you a chance to comment. A child gets on the bus with other children, let's say 12, 13-year-old. He's wearing a kippah. And as he's riding along the bus, somebody knocks off his kippah. So what are we going to say? Children, that's what they do. Kids, they're fighting with each other. They bother each other. Okay, so they knocked off his kippah. And this is a child who's going to go home and he's going to think, he's not going to feel comfortable. Welcome, Genya.
Hi, how are you? I'm sorry I couldn't get on.
Oh,
but
I'm sorry.
I'm now.
Okay, yeah. Great. We can't hear you clearly, but I'm going to mute you, Genya, so that we can just continue the thought.
Oh, please. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all. So this kid feels like maybe I did something wrong. But when he hears that it wasn't just him that got his kippah knocked off, just the other day or the other week or a year ago, an old, respected man in his community, a respected businessman or rabbi in his community also got on the bus and had his kippah knocked off. What does he realize? This kid realizes it's not about me, that I did something wrong. The issue is with them. It's absurd. It doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to rationalize this because that's the first knee-jerk reaction that we attempt to do, is rationalize things. But when we see the absurdity of it, it changes our perspective. And we, instead of taking the blame ourselves, we realize, no, this just doesn't make any sense. Is that resonating?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. That's great. So let's take a look. I'm going to skip text number 2. Let's take a look at what might be our ideal reaction. Text number 2, I'll summarize, is Josephus, who is a famous Jewish historian from the times of the Romans, who had gone over to the Roman side. It's a difficult story, but one of his books was actually defending the Jewish people against another historian who had written disgusting and ridiculous things about the Jewish people. He spent an entire book writing against this historian Apion, but we don't know too much about this book because ultimately giving an answer to absurdity is not going to get you too far. And that's the next point, is understanding that we're not going to get too far by presenting people with the facts. What you first think is, well, this is crazy, but if I only had a chance to share the facts, we would be well past this. But it doesn't work that way. And it's because it's similar to like a conspiracy theory. That Tracy mentioned before. Some people at the time of 9/11, when Al-Qaeda was willingly taking the credit for the attack, some people would and preferred to say it was the Mossad who arranged the attack. Not only that, but they had all their Jewish friends warned a day in advance not to go to the Twin Towers that day. They didn't even bother. This was brought up on a website, the Information Times. They didn't bother to provide a source or provide a motive. This was just slander and absurdity because they could. So what are you going to answer them with the facts? It doesn't work. There's a very interesting text. We're going to go to page number 56, text 5, self-sealing quality. Tracy, I'd love for you to read for us if you can. Page 56.
Okay, one moment. I'm just scrolling over to it. Let me see. So, okay. Dealing with absurdity. Upon reading anti-Semitic slanders and lies, we may be tempted to consider it sufficient to simply broadcast the correct information. While this type of effort is beneficial, it is not enough to solve the problem because some haters simply refuse to allow themselves to be confused with facts. A second point that is clarified by the sheer absurdity of anti-Semitism is that anti-Semitism is a misnomer. A more accurate term used by Jews in prior generations is evil or wickedness.
So go ahead, if you may, and read the text from Devorah Lipstadt. If you could read a little bit further.
Self-sealing quality. It is hard, if not impossible, to explain something that is essentially irrational, delusional, and absurd. That is the nature of all conspiracy theories, of which anti-Semitism is just one. Think about it. Why do some people insist that the moon landings took place on a stage set someplace in the American West? Despite the existence of reams of scientific and personal evidence to the contrary, they believe this because they subscribe to the notion that the government and other powerful entities are engaged in vast conspiracies to fool the public. If we were to provide these conspiracy theorists with evidence that proves the landing was indeed on the moon, they would a priori dismiss what we said and assume that we are a part of the conspiracy. To try to defeat an irrational supposition, especially when it is firmly held by its proponents, with a rational explanation is virtually impossible. Any information that does not correspond with the conspiracy theorists' preferred social, political, or ethnic narratives is ipso facto false. Social scientists have described such theories as having a self-sealing quality that makes them particularly immune to challenge.
So it's absurd, but you can't even defend yourself with the facts. It's not going to get you anywhere. And she says it so well. She writes it so beautifully. It's also contradictory, and I'll leave you to take a look following the class at the text number 4. We're not going to look into it now, but it's self-contradictory because they hate you when you're religious and they hate you when you're not religious. They hate you however you look, and they hate you in any generation for different reasons. If you're a socialist, if you're a capitalist, if you're lazy, if you're ambitious, you could never get anywhere. Here's such a fascinating idea. So first of all, there's a great joke. The Polish premier, following the First World War, they had to kind of figure everything out after the First World War. They had to go to the table and have meetings and discussions between the different world powers. And he's having a conversation with President Wilson of the United States. And he says, I found myself in a very difficult position. If we don't do well at the conference table for our country, I'm going to go back to my country. It's going to be a mess. People are going to be upset. They're going to go out and get drunk, and they're going to kill all the Jews. It's a difficult position to be in. So President Wilson said, and what if you do get what you want at the conference table? What if you get your way? You get whatever you're asking for? He's like, well, the people are going to be so happy. They're probably going to go out and get drunk and kill all the Jews. So if they lose, kill all the Jews. If they win, kill all the Jews. It's you don't gain even a foot in this position. But here's the most fascinating idea that I didn't previously know. What is the name of this, the issue that we're dealing with? Anti-Semitism. Any ism, Judaism, socialism, capitalism, makes it sound like this is something sophisticated. This is something that has grounding, that has a theory. This is anti-Semitism. It's a pretty impressive name. You know who created that name? Take a look. Text number 6, page 57 in the student books. This fellow's name is Wilhelm Marr. He's a German writer, political theorist, and agitator, which is quite a title. He founded the Anti-Semites League, the first organization devoted exclusively to promoting political anti-Semitism. And I'm going to skip towards the end of that text, page 58, middle of the paragraph. Marr coined the term antisemitismus in Latin, but that's the word anti-Semitism that we have today. And this was for him a word which denoted a secular racial hatred of Jews. He used the word anti-Semitism to make Jew hatred seem rational, sanctioned by science, and even polite. It's just a polite theory that some people ascribe to. That's nonsense. Anti-Semitism is not anti-Semitism. It's rishus. It's wickedness. We're using the wrong word here. When you're challenging something, you have to get down to the root. What is it about? That's what we're trying to do tonight. Why does it persist? Where does it come from? Well, we know not to look in the name because the name was invented by a fellow who was just happy with the result of his newfounded term that he just introduced. And if you'll see in text number 7, there was a famous Jewish businesswoman who took over her husband's jewelry business in the 17th century. He had a very successful business, and following his passing, she took over the business and did very, very well. And she was a politically powerful lady as well. She wrote a diary. This is the 17th century. Fascinating. And in her diary, she writes also that she wrote the diary just to get out all of her melancholic thoughts. She had to get out her thoughts onto a paper. She had a difficult life. And she says that in Hamburg, there were 2 Jewish people that were killed, and the murderer was caught and was going to be sentenced to death. But the agitation in the city, the sense in that city of like underlying violence and frustration at the fact that one of their own, one of the non-Jewish people could be put to death for killing a Jew, everybody was mad. And she said that the authorities got involved and they prevented any sort of massacre. But she said it's such rishus, it's such evil wickedness that they could have this approach and have this way of hating. That's the true term. Rishus, Russia, like evil, wicked. That's what it is. It's not a nice theory or term that we could lend credence to. Any comments? Questions or comments? You're welcome to go with either. Okay, so where are we holding in the scheme of things? We've just explained how it's, I like to call it the AAA. It's absurd, it's ancient, and it's irrational. It's against any rational sense. So if it is, then what is the cause? Why is anti-Semitism persisting so long? Why does it exist? What's driving it?
It's a way of, I feel it's a way of having control of your situation. It actually says this in the text, that the reason why conspiracy theories are such a thing, it's a way for people who are extraordinarily paranoid about their situation to regain control over their situation. And unfortunately, Jews have been the target of choice because we don't fit in any capacity. So ergo, we're the enemy.
Excellent. Very good. So you have 59. You have a few lines here. You could put down your sense of what's driving anti-Semitism, and Tzvi said it beautifully.
Thank you.
I think you'll find some very cool insight on page 60. We'll read together from Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. He's quite
I met the man twice.
Quite an impressive fellow. He passed away just this year.
I know. God bless his soul. I met the man twice as a kid.
Wow.
A legend of Judaism. Wonderful human being.
Wow. Yeah. And I'm seeing in his work, actually just bought this book, and I can't say that I've gone through too much of it, but at least I'm seeing some of his work here in our texts. He talks about the reasonings behind anti-Semitism. Take a look. Text number 8, page 60 in the student books. And Ruth, would you be kind enough to read for us? It's a bit of a difficult read. Just giving you a heads up. Multiple
explanations. There has been an almost endless set of speculations about what the cause of anti-Semitism actually is. Some have seen it in psychological terms: displaced fear, externalization of inner conflict, projected guilt, the creation of a scapegoat. Others have given it a socio-political explanation. Jews were a group who could conveniently be blamed for economic resentments, social unrest, class conflict, or destabilizing change. Yet others view it through the prism of culture and identity. Jews were the stereotyped outsiders against whom a group could define itself. Yet others, noting the concentration of anti-Semitism among the very faiths, Christianity and Islam, that trace their descent to Abraham and Judaism, favor a Freudian explanation in terms of the myth of
Oedipus,
we seek to kill those who give us birth. It would be strange indeed if so complex a phenomenon did not give rise to multiple explanations.
Thank you. So if we can take a look at the first one, it was what Tzvi was describing as when somebody has something going on inside, somebody has negative feelings inside, they want to get rid of those feelings, but they don't want to take the long route, which is to face those feelings, to actually deal with them, and they'd rather take the short route, which is to project those feelings onto others. So if I have anger inside about something, I'd rather project it onto another and claim that they're to blame, and therefore I could be angry at them. Or like Tzvi said, if I'm paranoid about something, then I could nicely and conveniently find a place to place the issue, and now it's safely the blame has been safely placed, and therefore I don't have to worry about it anymore. So externalization is taking what's inside and placing it on someone else or something else. Or like we always see the convenient blame, Jews are conveniently different. We've consistently been different. Tracy mentioned that earlier, being made to be the other. We're always the other because we look different, we act different, and we live close together. We live in a group. And finally, the Freudian explanation, which is quite fascinating. Yes, go ahead, Kenya. I'm going to ask you to unmute we don't hear you, Kenya.
Are those the reasons that Rabbi Jonathan stating? I missed that part of it.
Yes, yes. He's collected, obviously, or put together,
Okay, so
compiled.
this is according to him, that he's giving those reasons.
Yes.
Okay, I got it.
Yes. So what we have is these explanations, and we're familiar with the notion that we're different and therefore we're conveniently blamed. I think that's something that we're all familiar with, but it still doesn't really get down to the bottom of it. It still doesn't really give a fire, a real energy into anti-Semitism that we see. It doesn't give it. Why just the Jews? Why not anybody else? There's a deeper explanation. And maybe we could just say another explanation, but I'd like to say that this is a deeper explanation, which goes a little bit below the surface of what we could see. And it's a fascinating one. And I think you'll be quite surprised at the clarity that it brings. This explanation is given by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in a talk in 1965. He gave talks on Purim when they had a gathering on Purim. And this was one of those talks. And the Rebbe brings from a Gemara, a Talmudic source. The Talmud is discussing the scenario of Haman and Achashverosh. In the story of Purim, Haman is the perpetrator, the wicked, evil minister who looks to annihilate the Jewish people. That's what he's out to do. He gets upset at Mordechai, the leader, and he gets upset at everybody. He decides that's it. He wants to get rid of them. He needs one thing. He needs the king's willing decree to put that into action. So what does he do? He goes to the king and proposes the decree to kill the Jewish people. And he says, and I'll read it for you, Haman says to the king, Yeshnoi am echad, there is one nation, mefuzar and mefarad, they're all spread out among the people, but they're very strange. They're a strange nation. They have strange customs. They're not like us. They don't have our customs. And they don't respect and honor the king or any of the king's customs. And guess what? He says to the king, it's not worth your while to keep them. I'd ask of you to wipe them out, to give me your signet ring, give me your ring, and I'll do it gladly for you. But you may be worried about the taxes that they bring to the king's coffers. Says Haman, I'll gladly give 10,000, huge sum of money, 10,000 silver coins, so that the king's coffers should not suffer as a result of the Jewish people being wiped out. So here he is. He's there to propose the decree, and he's there to give the 10,000 coins. Silver talents, you could say, kikar kesef. It's an immense amount of money. It's not a small sum that Haman was willing to dish out. And what does the king reply? The king says, you want to kill them? Gladly. I'd also love to have them wiped out. Take my signet ring and do as you wish. And guess what? You can keep your silver. So this is the classic win-win situation. Haman wants to kill them. He needs Achashverosh to help him. He asks Achashverosh to give him the permission and he'd pay for it. And Achashverosh says, what do you mean? You're doing me a favor. Go ahead. A win-win situation. That's pretty much something we're familiar with on a regular basis. We have win-win situations. We go to the store, you take your kids with to the store, and you make sure to buy them a candy or something yummy that they could enjoy the experience while you get your shopping done. Or if it's a husband, then he has to buy something so that the wife could get her shopping done. Whoever it is and however it is, we're very familiar with a win-win situation. But the Gemara, the Talmud, finds it necessary to give a parable, to give a mashal, explaining this scenario. And what does the Talmud say? Take a look together in the student book, page 61. And I'll read it actually in Hebrew together for us. You could read it along in English, or you could follow in the Hebrew with me. Mashal de Achashverosh, a parable for Achashverosh and Haman. This conversation that went between them. What's a good parable for it? What's it synonymous to? L'shnei b'nei Adam, two people. Le'echad, one had a tail, had a big mound, b'seich sadehu, in his field. It's his field, it's his property. And for some reason, he must have had in mind to make either a big structure or a building. And he lost his money. He couldn't build whatever he needed to build. And he's left with this huge mound of dirt. Disgusting. It's an eyesore. He doesn't need it. It's taking up space. Who wants it? He'd only love to have the rights to dump it somewhere. He needs to pay for the rights to dump it. That's what he wants. And another, the other fellow did the opposite. He dug a huge ditch in his field, his property, and he was obviously planning to put in a swimming pool, but he lost his money or he lost his plans, and now he's left with a huge ditch that he needs filled. This is annoying. This is bothering him. This is a void, a vacuum that he wants to fill. And one day they meet up. And so the fellow who's looking to get this mound of dirt to fill his huge ditch, what does he say? He says to the fellow who has a mound, I see that you've got a mound in your field. Would you sell me the dirt so that I could fill up my ditch? The man with the mound says, what do you mean? Sell it to you? I'd gladly give it to you. I'm looking to get rid of it. And that's the way the Gemara describes Haman and Achashverosh. So we have a parable, pretty simple parable, but there's two very straightforward questions. First of all, why do you need a parable? The Gemara only says that which adds perspective, it adds insight. But we have a very simple win-win situation that everybody could understand. What is the Gemara adding with its insight by adding this parable? It's trying to explain to us the theory behind Haman and Achashverosh. How do we get a better insight with this parable? And second of all, Haman was looking to wipe out the Jewish people. So that would be seemingly synonymous with the fellow who has a big mound of dirt. He wants to get rid of it. Why do we describe his issue as being a ditch, a very deep hole that he's looking to fill? Why is that the description that is appropriate for Haman's sentiment towards the Jewish people? Are those questions clear? They're good questions. This is going to be a very, very powerful idea and very insightful. I'd say hold on to your seats, but I'm pretty sure that everyone's relaxed at home. I'd love to see each one of your seats. Someone's in a couch and someone's, sitting at their kitchen table. Everybody's relaxed here. Last night we were in person, so I could move the room a little bit, but over here everyone's nice and comfy. The Rebbe says a fascinating explanation. What we find is that on the surface of it, a very easy explanation for anti-Semitism is the fact that we look different, the fact that we stick out, the fact that we bother people by doing things differently to them. That's like the mound. We're just in the way, we're taking up space, so they kick us out. They try to shut down how we do things or engage with us in society so that we shouldn't be doing different. But ultimately, what pushes that agenda? The Rebbe says that every person, every human being was created in the image of Hashem, B'Tselem Elokim, correct? What does it mean that we were created B'Tselem Elokim? And one of the explanations is that we're not just one of the creations in this world. God created many things. He created material and vegetation and mineral, all these different things that were created are all part of the world and the creation. Human beings were placed into the world for a purpose. Obviously, everything in the world serves a purpose, but human beings were their being on this world, their metzias, their existence is for the sake of a certain purpose. The Jewish people have a unique offshoot within that picture. The Jewish people have a Torah, we have our mitzvot, we have our connection to Hashem, our connection to God, and our mission is to bring godliness into the world, to reveal a consciousness in the world. We're there to be a light unto the nations and to bring all of the nations, all of humanity to this awareness that we're here for a purpose and ultimately to connect to a higher consciousness, a higher morality, and not just to get sucked into the materialistic life. So you have anyone who lives in the world like we do, you could wake up, you could have a cup of coffee, you could do some work, you could go out for a walk, you could come home, have another cup of coffee, relax, read a book, go to sleep. You could go through your day without getting really deeper. And that's fine. That feels just fine. Doesn't feel odd. But ultimately, there is this void inside where a person is not really pushing their true fulfillment. And that's a void that they have inside of them, which needs to be filled. And you could be distracted with other things, but it's always going to be there. It's always going to feature as a void. A fascinating quote from, you won't believe it. I mean, you might believe it, or you may have heard it, but from Hitler Yemach Shemai. Hitler himself, in a conversation with an author who may not have absolutely the right agenda in his writings. He fell out with the Nazis. So he wrote a bunch of conversations that he had with Hitler. He wrote in a conversation that Hitler said to him, the Jews must be wiped out because they represent the consciousness of the world. We have to get rid of them because they represent this conscious depth that we don't want. From the horse's mouth, literally, from the horse's mouth himself, to state that that's the reason that he wants to get rid of them, because they represent something deeper. So, yes, go ahead, Tracy.
It's strange. I find that incredibly ironic because when you were speaking, I was thinking that another anti-Semitic trope is the chosen people. People don't understand that it means chosen for a specific task, or like you said, to be a light unto the world. People think that it means superior to everyone else. But it's so ironic that Hitler kind of understood that when nobody else did. So I'm sitting here thinking, oh, that's just so very strange.
Yeah. Yeah. They saw us as this entity, this mound, but there was a depth to it that not every one of them understood themselves. Sometimes it was a subconscious feeling that led them to this kind of reaction within themselves. Now, it's very important to realize where we're going with this. where we're going with this as a general direction is the anti-Semitism, this hate that's being projected, is not something that belongs in our world. It's not our cause. It's not something that we created. The hate belongs in the hater. That's where the hate exists. Where people are hating, where they have these terrible perspectives, it's their issue. So we're trying to understand, if it was our issue, if it's something that we did wrong, then we could try fix it. We could look inwards. But this is not about looking inside of us. Rather, it's about looking inside of those that are hating and understanding why, what's driving them. In general, psychology today is very comfortable with the notion that when someone projects negative energy to others, it's because of something inside that they're uncomfortable with. When somebody projects abuse onto others, it's because they're struggling with the sense of power. They're struggling with their identity, with their place. When someone projects anger, it's because they're struggling inside. When they're projecting paranoia, everything, stress, it's all resulting from a feeling that's happening inside. And so I think it's very comfortable for us to assume that this reality and projection of hate, of anti-Semitism, is because of something that's going on inside. What that also means is that we're not going to go for the easy answer of let's change something by us and that will help change something by them. Let's change our, I'm not going to quite say that. We're going to have something to do. Again, we're here tonight to outsmart anti-Semitism, which means to do better in how we approach it and to actually practically do better with the results that we want in the end of the day. So we're going to have a lead in from this point into how can we practically benefit the situation and improve it to ultimately where we want to go, a place of peace and joint projects and joint work in service of Hashem across the world. Thank you, Josh, for joining. We'll see you next week. So in text number 11, just to take a quick peek, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs talks about against internalization. This is on page 64. Why we should not internalize it and turn the results of it inward and say, oh, well, we've got to stop being the chosen people if they don't like the fact that we're the chosen people. Fascinatingly, in 1945, the Reconstructionist movement had a meeting together, their leaders, and they said, we must stop believing that we are the chosen people, because that is not something which will bring to a good result. It's not accepted and it's not appropriate. So we have to stop believing it. Literally, just like you said, Tracy, it's a crazy response. We're going to stop believing it because it's not accepted? No, the issue is by them. And this is a fascinating idea because, first of all, we want always to be able to display our Jewishness. The fact that we have, thank God, a free country like America, great joke. Fellow was looking to leave the USSR, and like many, he was refused. He had requested permission to leave, and he was refused once and twice. He was a refusenik. Ultimately, he finally got his permission to go, and he's talking to the officer just as he's getting his papers to leave. And the officer says to him, real Russian fellow, he says, why are you so looking to go to America? why is America so much better than Russia? Both the Russian Constitution and American Constitution, they both give freedom of speech. So the fellow responds, that's true. But in America, there is also freedom after speech. There's not only freedom of speech, you have freedom after speech too. It's a wonderful thing. We live in America. We live in a society where we could actually do, What's important for us is that we don't go to the answer of, I'm not going to show and display my Judaism as a method of taming the negative energy towards me, but rather we appreciate, if we can and act on it, the opportunities that we have to display our Jewishness. Because by definition, if it's a free country, then it's not only free for you to practice your Judaism in your house, it's a free opportunity for you to be Jewish everywhere. And yet it really made the previous generation was very uncomfortable coming from Europe. They were super uncomfortable with the idea of displaying Jewish pride in the open, in the street. You want to put up a menorah in public? There were lawsuits against it. It went to the highest court because some people were uncomfortable with displaying Jewish pride. Why? Because they thought if we tame it down on our end, it'll help. You know the joke back in the day, 60s, 70s, as people were trying to come into the American society. So they felt like their Jewish names, old country names, weren't so befitting of a good American businessman. So here you have a guy who went into business. He did well. He became a CEO. He's decided that's it. I'm no more Mr. Rosenfeld. I'm going to be Mr. O'Hara. So sure enough, he changes his name. He's now Mr. O'Hara. One day, his mother gives a ring at his office. Secretary picks up. Hi, Mrs. Rosenfeld. Can I speak to my son? Sure. She turns to the boss. Mr. O'Hara, it's your mother, Mrs. Rosenfeld, on the phone. The boss picks up. He's like, Mama, where were you? We wanted you to come by last night for the housewarming. We have a beautiful new place in Manhattan where you told us you'd be there. Why didn't you come? And so his mother said, it's a beautiful, nice building you got in Manhattan. So beautiful. Very impressed. He's like, Mama, you were in the building? She says, sure. I was in the lobby from 7, stayed until 11, and I went home. He says, Mama, you were in the lobby? Why didn't you come up? She said, I forgot your name. So there you had this notion of cutting away from that which sticks out, because maybe that's going to solve the problem. And the truth is, when we are proud with our Judaism, it actually benefits us in 3 ways, very distinct ways. First of all, there are good people in the world. Could we do a census here between us 4, us 5 on the call? Are there good people in the world? Let's get some nods. Come on, an energetic nod. Of course, good people. We love good people. There are many of them. Not only are they good people, I'll tell you a secret. We have a strong belief in Mashiach, which means a time of redemption, a time where the world will be filled with goodness and kindness for all of humanity, for all people. We're believers that the world could be a very good place, good people. So one second, if there are good people, then a Jewish person who's a mensch, who's a kind person, let's say somebody working in an office, they're a good person, they're kind, they're a mensch. When their fellow co-workers notice one day that this individual is wearing a kippah, or this wonderful lady is wearing a Magen David necklace, they notice that she's Jewish, what does it do for them in their minds? They now say, oh, this person's a good person. and this person is Jewish. And they put it together. And so those good people have now a very good sense of a good perspective of the Jewish people. And that's what displaying and sharing our Jewishness with others does for those good people around us. It helps their perspective. It also gives the minorities in this country a strong foundation to work with alongside us and others. If we're going to be cowering to the majority, then it doesn't help the others that also look different and are coming from a different place, a different culture. It doesn't help them. But when we are strong in just being the good people that we are and displaying our Jewishness alongside that, we help them be their best that they could be with their culture and their language, not only at home in private, but even wherever they go. But ultimately, and here's where the points come together. What are we saying? We're saying that the issue here is this ditch. You have anti-Semites that just are bothered superficially about what's going on. But ultimately, there is something underlying. There is a void that they sense, a sense of purpose, their own purpose, that subconsciously the Jewish people, by being who we are, we represent a higher consciousness, a connection to Hashem, a connection to Torah and the commandments of Hashem and the way Hashem wants for the world to go. We represent a connection to God. And that's what makes them uncomfortable. But ultimately, we appreciate that this is everyone's heritage. Everyone is there to fulfill this purpose in connecting to God and into improving the world around them and living deeper. So when we choose to live our purpose fully, we actually serve as a good example, and we encourage that direction. So in the back of our minds, we appreciate if this is their struggle, then when we show weakness in this area, it's not helping them. Ultimately, we want everyone to be on the same page. We want everyone to be living deeper with a deeper consciousness. That's what's making them uncomfortable, but that's also where they want and will be eventually going. We believe in Mashiach's coming, which means we believe that everyone will be on that same page. What's going to bring that forward? It's living with our Jewishness. But here's the catch. When you are a good person and you share your goodness with others, it's got to go one step further. You've got to share with others that your good qualities are because of your Jewishness. Your upbringing is what gives you those special qualities. Your education is what gives you those special qualities. Your Jewishness is the cause of your goodness. And so people want goodness. They'll appreciate that they also want Jewishness. I'm going to open for any comments, and then we'll go inside to the text to give an example before we wrap up. Any comments on these ideas? It's all clear, huh? That's wonderful.
Yes, Rabbi. It's all very, very much clear.
You know, there's an alcoholic drink, 96% alcohol. It's called Everclear. When you're on that stuff, everything is forever clear.
Of course. And if not that, then Bartanura.
Ah, very good. Okay, the more practical example.
Yes.
So I'm happy that these ideas are coming forth clearly. Welcome, Joel. Thank you for joining. So here's the fascinating example of what we're saying. We're saying that a person shares with others. Their Jewishness is the cause of their goodness that will ultimately accomplish a minimization of the anti-Semitism, because you know how it works. What's the difference between a Jew and an anti-Semite? An anti-Semite says, Jewish people, they're a disaster. We're much better off without them. But Goldberg, he's got a heart of gold. Special guy. And a Jew says, Jewish people, I'm Israel. What could be better? But Cohen, he's a nudnik. He should be sent home. I don't want to ever see him again. So even that anti-Semitic people appreciate, and throughout history, there were always exceptions. Even very anti-Semitic leaders had an exception to the rule. Oh, but this guy, he's a smart individual. I'll make him a minister. He'll help me make my money. There were always exceptions. There were always good people that they accepted in their circle. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to match up that goodness that we represent is because of our Jewishness. Let's go back to the story of Esther, the queen and the heroine in the story of Purim. She's the queen. And she's in a very difficult position. She's trying to save her people. She's been tasked by the leader, Mordechai, with the task, you've got to save the day. How much pressure is that? Just a little bit of pressure. Your entire people are about to be annihilated and you're there to save the day. Only a little bit of pressure. How is she going to do this? She's going to get in the king's good graces, but the king hates the Jewish people. She's going to invite Haman and the king to a feast together. What is she going to say to them that's going to change how they feel? Seemingly, you have Haman, who hates the Jews, the king who hates the Jews, sitting together, and Esther, who's a Jewess. They don't know it, but she's a Jewess, but she's still outnumbered. It's 2-on-1. What is she going to say that will change their minds? Even the king. How is she going to answer all of those claims that were made for why the Jewish people are not worthwhile? And what does she say? She turns to the king and she says, King, you should know that the people you are trying to kill are my people. That's all she says. They're not worthwhile to be wiped out. They're my people, and please don't kill them. He doesn't answer the anti-Semitic claims of why we're different and our customs and if we are loyal or not loyal. She doesn't address any of the claims. She just says simply, they're my people, and therefore you should not kill them. How is she addressing the problem? Because she's saying, dear Ahasuerus, you chose me from all of the thousands of girls that you could have chosen. You chose me because of my qualities, because of my grace, because of my humility, because of the special beauty that I have. You chose me. You should know, she says, those qualities are because of my Jewishness. So Ahasuerus now puts the two together. Oh, so she's somebody that I appreciate, and it's because of her Jewishness that she has these qualities. Of course, I don't want to kill the Jewish people. And sure enough, he issues a decree that they could protect themselves, and they, thank God, came out okay. You know, says they try to kill us, we won, and let's eat. That's ultimately, we have the best of the best. How did we get past that? By just sharing that the specialness that we have is because we're Jewish. So I'm going to take you back to the text. We've gone a little bit of time out of the text. And I want to share with you text number 10, just reinforcing this idea that the issue is the consciousness within inside each one of us, and we're trying to, it's page 63 in the student textbooks. And see, if you're with us and you have the book, I'd love for you to read for us.
Sure, what
Haman
page?
is speaking with his family, page 63.
63, okay.
Here, the context is Haman is chatting with his family, and Haman is describing his situation. And look how Haman describes it.
Right. Haman told them about his magnificent wealth and his many sons, and how the king had promoted him and advanced him above the other officials and royal courtiers. What is more, said Haman, Queen Esther personally prepared a feast, and besides the king, she did not invite anyone but me. And tomorrow too, I am invited by her, along with the king. But all this means nothing to me each time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the palace gate.
Thank you. So Haman had everything a man could ask for. He had the wealth, he had the power, he had the family. He had anything that you could ask for, he had. But how does he describe a situation? This is all like nothing for me because of Mordecai the Jew. Something inside of him was driving him crazy. He had this void. As many things that he could procure would not fill that void inside. And so he decided, instead of filling the void, let's get rid of the trigger. Who's triggering this void? It's the Jewish people. Let's get rid of them. So if we wanted to solve anti-Semitism, would it be by giving the wealth away? No, because as much wealth as they would have, they wouldn't feel comfortable. Would it be by giving the power away? No, because as much power that they have, they would still not be comfortable. Would it be by giving away our values? No, because ultimately, everyone needs our values. And that's what's going to take the world to a better place. And you never know, and we'll end off with this, you do a good deed, you never know who's benefiting from your good deed. They say a mitzvah, a good deed is like a candle. You light a candle, you could have 1,000 other people light their candle from your flame, and your flame will never be missing. It will never diminish. You never know who could come over and light their candle and take a good example from your actions and brighten their own life from how they've seen your example. So what ultimately we want to be doing is living a brighter and in the sense of our Jewishness, living with our Jewishness in a proud way and displaying it in a beautiful way that others appreciate that these qualities that we have are hand in hand with our Jewishness. And then everybody wants it. And we bring the world to a good place. Just like Esther, all she had to say was, I'm Jewish. She just stated that. And the picture was complete. And so that's for tonight. I'd like to give you a quick peek on what's coming up next week. First of all, you have in the student books, you have many pages in between the lessons where you could look at some extra readings, some very interesting stuff. But next week, we're going to do a dive into contemporary anti-Semitism, which sometimes manifests itself as antagonism towards the Jewish state. How can we counter Israel-focused anti-Semitism? Why are Jews joining anti-Israel movements? And as we see and try to get a handle of what's going on and why is this happening, we're going to take a better look into our relationship with the promised land, with Eretz Israel. What is our relationship with it and the very nature of the Jewish nationhood? That will be next week, God willing. So thank you, Ruth and Tracy. Thank you, Genya and Zvi and Joel and everyone that came before and after. It's good to see everybody together tonight. Thank you.
This was very good, Rabbi. Thank you. I'm sorry I haven't been so conversational or showing my camera. It's just because I'm very tired.
Okay. We're gonna forgive you this time, but next time you have to take a good nap before we start.
Oh no, it's because of work. It's because of work. My library. But yeah, I want to show my face next time. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
For saying that. Good night, Ruth. Good to see you.
Thank you.
I'll stay on for a couple of
everyone.
minutes if anybody wants to ask any questions or share some discussion. L'chaim.
L'chaim to life. Good night, Rabbi.
Good night, Zvi. Thank you.
Right.
Thank
Good
you.
night, Genya. Good night, Tracy.
Oh, Rabbi, so I think I can come by maybe tomorrow to pick up the book.
Sure.
Okay.
You're welcome to. So I just want to clarify. 224 West Rock Ave in Westville.
Yes, it's 2 doors on either side, multifamily. Yeah,
Yes.
I went up on the porch, didn't see anything.
That's so strange.
It's very
I'll go
strange.
home now. I'll see what maybe, I don't know what happened to
Yeah,
it.
I looked around, but I didn't want to look around too much because I didn't want people to think that, oh, I'm
Of course.
whatever. So I figured it might be easier if I go at lunchtime. I'm right up the street. So maybe if
Oh,
I
wow.
come when it's light out. Yeah, I work on Winchester Avenue. So
Sure.
yeah, so and you're on my way home. So if I come maybe when it's still light out, I might have a better chance of seeing it. But I came by and I looked and again, I didn't want to be looking
Okay,
around
yeah.
with
My
the
apologies.
flashlight. So yeah, so
But I also would love to share with you the recording for the first class if you'd like that, and then
yes,
we'll be
please
able
do.
to take a
I
look.
would like that. Like a
You're
catch.
welcome. Nice to
Thank
meet
you very
virtually.
much. Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, have a good night.
You too.
Keep well.